Hey friends, my name is Kira and welcome to my garden. I started this video project wanting to have a way to really tell the story of this 2023 gardening year. And as I was looking at everything, it really became more of a visual love letter for all of the things that my garden gave me this year that I'm so grateful for. 2023 was my third year gardening and the first full year gardening in this space. So we were trying a lot of new things and growing a lot of my skills. As a person who just a few short years ago thought that I had a black thumb and I killed all plants, gardening has been so restorative to me in not just who I think I am, but what I think I'm capable of. I really do believe that if I can become a gardener, then anyone can do this. This year I tried a lot of new things, like trying to be really intentional about the soil that we put in our garden. I learned that there was a really easy way to check for herbicide contamination, which was really cool. And all you need are some peas or beet plants and a few weeks' time. We definitely had a few curveballs thrown our way, like our beautiful peach tree getting leaf curl right at the beginning of the season, and us finding out that there really wasn't much we could do about it until the fall or winter time. All of a sudden, we had peach, apricot, apple, and citrus trees that we never had before. So we had a lot of learning to do, but we really enjoyed the challenge. Other things, like me having trouble germinating pepper seeds, ended in a happy accident of us having 140 pepper plants to find space for, which was a great problem to have. And the most exciting thing about this garden year was that this was the year that we would work on our expansion projects. So building out more beds and really just doing a bunch of the projects that made the garden better. One of the first things that we did was work on our grapes. So this house came with two really great established grapevines. The fruit on them was really good, but they were growing on this little tunnel that was hard to get under to grab the grapes. And so we came up with this idea of building a grape arch. And the idea behind it was we wanted to create a little shady space where kids could come and play under it. We could have picnics under there. Or one day we could put a little bench to sit under it. And this ended up being one of my favorite projects that we did. And before we knew it, it was time to harden off our seedlings and get them ready to be planted outside. This came a little later for us than it normally would because we had such a cool start of the season, but that ended up being a good thing because it gave us more time to get the garden set up. We added 4 more raised beds to finish the main part of the garden, and before we filled them with soil, we decided to put in T-posts for our arch trellises, so we knew that they'd be stable enough in the soil underneath the beds. So this meant that I had to figure out where I wanted all of my arches to go ahead of time, and my husband Andrew drove the posts in for me. Once that was done, it was time to fill all the beds. So we wood chipped all the garden pathways and put cardboard in the bottoms of all the beds. And it took us a really long time to fill them up, to bring the soil down the hill one wheelbarrow full at a time. And in the middle of all that, we were trying to make sure that we kept up with things like fertilizing the grapes, fruit trees, and berry bushes. Then it was back to filling the beds. So we did 30 minutes here or an hour there, as much as we could do every day, and that went on for about a week. Then, one glorious day, we were done and could move on to putting in our drip irrigation system. Andrew had dug the trenches and did all of the underground tubing for these back in the fall when we had placed the beds originally, so all we had to do was connect the drip lines in the beds themselves. Then we placed the rest of our cattle panel arches. We ended up putting in 4 arches between these 3 beds. It was really cool putting these up because they were something that I had imagined all winter long, and they really made the garden feel like it was going to be something special. We absolutely love growing on arches, and I think it's always going to be something that I have in future gardens. At this point, I was so excited to start planting that I actually went out there the same morning to get started. As our fruit trees started to set fruit, it was time to thin them out. We picked all of the fruit that was misshapen or was just growing too close to other fruit. I used the space between my thumb and pinky to figure out the spacing that we wanted. And our hope was that this would allow our peach tree to produce good fruit even though it was sick. This was a really exciting time overall because even though the garden wasn't fully planted yet, we were starting to see blooms everywhere. And my cut flower garden experiment dreams were starting to grow. Next up on the project list was tackling the side of the garden that we had built the year before. So first things first, I cut out all these sticks that were the old pepper plants. So I had heard that you could overwinter pepper plants outside in zone 10, and since we were in zone 9, I decided to give it a try. As you can see, this experiment did not work, but it didn't cost me anything to try. This is something that I really love so much about gardening is you have so much space and freedom to just try things and see what will happen. And I've gotten so many great surprises from just being willing to try. And having a space where you can practice the mindset of seeing the results you get as an experiment rather than proof or a reason to judge yourself for success or failure is such a powerful shift to have and apply really anywhere in your life. So after I cleared the beds, we moved the drip tube back and got ready to top off the beds with soil. We ended up burying a lot of the things that we had already been growing in these beds, but for some other things like the garlic, we were able to very carefully move the soil around them so that they can continue growing. Once all 9 of our beds were full, it was time to finish planting. So our peppers were some of the last things to go out. Finding a space for all 140 plants was definitely a fun challenge, but we got them all in. Then the seeds we direct sowed were starting to pop up. Our herb beds were super happy and full, and we started to see ladybug larvae all over the place. May was when the weather really started to change. We harvested bowls and bowls of snap peas. The blackberries were starting to flower. And the green stalks were going strong. Our apricot tree looked lush and beautiful, but that came with aphids. Overall, most of the trees were doing really well. And really exciting things were happening in the garden. The cut flower garden was slowly starting to grow. And then the best thing happened. The ladybugs found the aphids on our apricot tree. At one point, I counted about 30 of them just on one part of the tree. As it warmed up, we saw the end of our snap peas. The berry bushes really started to thrive. And what seemed like overnight, our grape arch filled in gloriously, and it was covered in tiny little grapes. Our tomato plants took off, and quickly needed to get their first pruning to keep them growing straight up. And despite being sick, our beautiful peach tree still gave us 33 pounds of fruit. All in all, the garden was starting to come together. This is when things really started to fill in, and the things that I envisioned all those months ago in the wintertime were finally coming to life. Now, not everything was a success, but there was still so much that was going right, or even better than I had planned. And we quickly had way more zucchini than we could eat. It was so fun hosting parties and getting cut flowers straight from the garden for our centerpieces, or use our produce in the food we served our guests. This was definitely the month of the flowers. I loved having cut flower beds in the middle of the garden, but my heart is always going to go to growing vegetables and flowers all mixed in together. Something about combining all of the different colors, heights, and textures all together makes my soul so happy. In the middle of the summer, it seems like there's always a week where things just go wild. So after months of carefully watching everything, and even despite myself thinking that nothing is going to grow as well as it should, and this is the year the garden fails, it still seems to surprise me when the garden is full of life and food. But even then, we're still coming up with new ideas, like adding in this pumpkin patch. It seems like every day in the summer, there's something new to see. We were so excited when the blackberries came in. We were checking them every single day to see if they were ready. And we ended up harvesting about 10 pounds of berries, and they were absolutely amazing. The Armenian cucumber, which is actually a melon, does really well in hot climates, and it was one of our best producers, and we absolutely love growing them. And I can't talk about this garden without mentioning this gigantic sunflower that grew like a tree. Our pepper plants were doing really well and forming lots of fruit. And my dream arches were coming to life. Summertime is when we start harvesting things almost every day because the garden is so abundant. There's always a point in the summertime where the harvests are coming in so strong that it kind of feels like we can't keep up. This was especially true this year because we added a new little one and became a family of 4. We harvested by the wagonful every 3 to 5 days. Even going out there for an hour, we couldn't get everything in that amount of time. There was just too much. We got what we could, we gave away a ton, but unfortunately, a lot of things got away from us or went bad still in the garden. And while I felt awful that we had so much waste, it was time for another life lesson. When you're doing your very best, you have to let go of all the negative self-talk about how you should be able to do more or do better. Because honestly, beating yourself up for not being perfect isn't making things better. In this really tough season of life with a newborn, we focused on enjoying the garden as much as we could and remembering that we had created this beautiful space to take a break and recenter ourselves. Even if that meant we just had the time and energy to walk through it for 5 minutes every couple days. I will forever be grateful to my past self for pushing through and planting this garden even though I was pregnant and sick, because this was the garden that I brought my baby boy home to. Eventually the harvest started to slow down a little bit and we got a chance to catch our breath. This is when cleanup started. Some plants were done for the season or started to show disease and they were ready to be taken out. The flowers that we had let go the past couple months needed to be deadheaded and have the old blooms removed in hopes of being able to continue harvesting them a little bit more into the fall. And man, there was lots of grass that needed to be taken out. It had completely devoured our beautiful wood chip paths and gotten into the beds. And we had massive 6-foot zucchini plants that had us drowning in zucchini. Well, they were finally ready to say goodbye. This is a great time in our garden because the harvests were still wonderful and we felt like we were also able to manage things again. It was bittersweet and some things were really hard to let go of, like the sunflower tree. As the season went on, we picked our first pumpkins from our pumpkin patch, which was super exciting. This was the first year that we didn't have to buy pumpkins for decorating, and we even gave some away, which is always my favorite thing to do. And I was also able to save some seeds from some of our favorite flowers. And much sooner than I would have liked, it was time to clean out the cut garden experiment. As the weather became cooler, there were signs everywhere that the summer garden was coming to a close. Without the heat, the pest pressure rose. But the plants were happier too and gave us one last hurrah of beautiful harvest. With a rainy week ahead of us, it was time to get the last of our pumpkins out of the garden while we still could. Then it was time to really put the summer garden to bed. We started to clear out entire beds. It took a lot of work that we spread out over many, many nap times, but eventually we got it done. And we were able to then start the plants that would take us into winter, although they went out much later than I would have liked. The fall and winter garden is really a hands-off garden for us, where our mindset is, if we get something, great, but if not, that's cool too. This time of year, we're in desperate need of a break from the garden, and while I do want to figure out how to grow things through the colder months, I'm happy to have a restful season as well. Late November brought in our first frost. What plants we had left for the pollinators were officially done. This meant it was time to harvest the very last thing in our garden, which was our peppers. We had such a wonderful pepper year. On this day alone, I picked over 13 pounds of peppers. Our goal for this 2023 garden was to grow 400 pounds of food. That was 200 more than we had ever grown before. And at the close of the year, we had grown 700 pounds of food. That is an incredible number that we had never thought that we'd get to when the year began. And that's not to mention all the food that we didn't have time to harvest that ultimately went into our compost pile. In 2024, our goal is to grow 1,000 pounds of food. Now, the wildest part about that goal, besides it sounding like an outrageously large number, is the fact that we think we can easily hit it. How crazy is that? As the holidays came around, the garden is pretty quiet. We don't really spend nearly as much time in it, but it's nice to go from working on it in the early mornings to spending the late evenings outside instead. The golden hour before the sun goes down, as the leaves are falling, has really its own sort of magic. As we spent time collecting leaves to feed to next year's garden, I can't help but reflect on all of the life that was lived in this beautiful space. I'm so incredibly grateful that a few years back, even though I didn't think I could ever keep plants alive, I listened to the little whisper that told me to try anyway. My life has been forever changed in so many ways by having a garden. And if you've had similar little whispers telling you to give it a try, I hope that this inspires and encourages you to just go for it. You can start as small or as big as you like. It all counts and it's all amazing. And who knows, you might just surprise yourself in the best way. As always, thanks for joining me in my garden for this look back down memory lane, and I hope you'll visit again soon. Bye.